What if the one creature you misunderstood was the only one trying to save your family? When a newborn kept crying through the night and a loyal German shepherd refused to leave her crib, everyone thought the dog had changed. But the truth behind Ranger's strange behavior would shatter a mother's heart and save a life. If this story touches you, please like, share, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more. A pale morning rested over the house, the kind of quiet light that makes old wood creak a little softer. Sarah Mitchell, 35, moved through that stillness with the slow steps of a woman who hadn't slept in days. Her brown hair, tied loosely in a fading bun, brushed against her cheek each time she bent over the cradle. She wore a pastel knit sweater and soft pants, clothes chosen more for survival than appearance. The small room carried the faint scent of warm milk and cedar, the kind of smell that settles in a home when a newborn arrives. And there, bundled in a cream-colored sleepsuit, lay little Ava, only 4 months old, her breaths short and delicate. In the corner, resting with rigid alertness, was Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur and a thick leather collar engraved with his name. Years ago, Sarah had found him shivering beside a gas station dumpster, ribs sharp beneath his coat, eyes dimmed by a kind of resignation she never forgot. She had lifted him into her car with trembling hands, promising him warmth, promising him safety. But now, as she reached toward Ava, Ranger rose, not with joy, not with a wag of his tail, but with a stillness that unsettled her. He stepped between her and the cradle, posture rigid, gaze fixed on the baby as though guarding something only he could sense. At first, Sarah tried to laugh it off. A dog being protective, she told herself. Nothing more. But the humor didn't settle. Her body was too tired, her heart too thin, stretched by hours of nighttime crying and the long absence of her husband Michael, who was working miles away. Her voice had grown small these days, softer, almost hoarse, like someone learning to whisper to her own worries. Ranger didn't move from the cradle. When Sarah gently reached toward Ava's blanket, he pressed his body closer, his fur rising slightly as he let out a low rumble. Not loud, not threatening, just enough to stop her hand. Sarah froze. She had known Ranger's every sound, his playful bark, his evening sighs, the soft whimper he once made when he first felt safe in their home. But this sound was different. It held tension, a message she couldn't read. And for the first time since rescuing him years ago, a thin line of fear traced through her chest. The morning light shifted across the hardwood floor as Ava stirred, a tiny movement that Ranger answered by leaning even closer. Sarah stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. Something was wrong. With him? Or with her? She couldn't tell any more. Exhaustion fogged her judgment, turning every moment into a small, uncertain echo. By midday, the unease deepened. Ranger paced around Ava's cradle with the steady, deliberate movement of a sentry on duty. Sarah watched from the doorway, arms folded, heart trembling in that quiet, aching way only mothers understand. She whispered his name. Ranger. Sweetheart. What's happening to you? But he barely flicked an easy ear. His world, for reasons she couldn't grasp, had narrowed entirely to her child. The final fracture came late afternoon. Ava had just fallen asleep after hours of fussing, her tiny fists unclenched at last. The room dimmed with growing shadows. And then, almost without warning, Ranger gripped the edge of her cradle blanket with his teeth and pulled, slowly, insistently, trying to drag the cradle away from the wall. A chill crawled up Sarah's spine. She rushed forward, voice shaking, and Ranger let out a deep growl, not at Ava, but at her. A sound filled with urgency, confusion, and something like desperation. Sarah stepped back as though struck. The dog she had once saved, the dog who slept at her feet every winter, the dog who trusted her first, now stood between her and her daughter. The house settled into a painful silence then, the kind that makes every breath feel loud. Sarah's hands trembled at her sides. She didn't understand him anymore, and she didn't understand the fear rising inside herself. By evening, one truth lingered like a weight in her chest. For the first time in years, she no longer knew if Ranger was protecting her child or becoming a danger she could no longer ignore. Rain tapped softly against the window, a slow rhythm that made the house feel older, almost thoughtful. Sarah Mitchell moved through that dim light like someone drifting in and out of a dream. Days without sleep had carved shadows beneath her eyes, as if life itself had taken a pencil to her face. The soft knit sweater she wore hung loosely on her frame. She paused beside the crib where baby Ava lay, twisting and fussing, her tiny face flushed with exhaustion. Sarah bent down, smoothing a trembling hand across the child's blanket, her fingers cold from fatigue. Behind her, Ranger watched. The 6-year-old German shepherd sat with a stiff posture, black and tan fur catching the thin line of light from the hallway. His ears flicked each time Ava whimpered. There was worry in the way he breathed, slow, deep, as though he carried the household's tension inside his own chest. When Sarah moved toward the doorway, he moved too, keeping close, his nails clicking softly on the wood floor. And yet, the distance between them grew in ways neither understood. Sarah spoke less these days. Her voice had become a fragile thread stretched thin by crying, by worry, by the feeling of being alone in a house that once felt full. She whispered, "It's okay, baby," even when she didn't believe it. Ranger nudged her hand once, gently, but she pulled away. A quiet part of her wondered if he was causing more harm than good. Another part, buried beneath fear, still remembered the day she found him abandoned in the rain, ribs visible, coat matted, eyes pleading for a chance he barely believed he deserved. The night deepened, thick with the scent of damp wood and warm milk. Ava's cries became sharper, cutting through rooms like thin blades. Sarah rocked her for hours until her arms trembled. When she tried to lay the infant down, Ranger stepped in the way, body angled toward the crib. He let out a soft whine, barely a sound, just enough to stop Sarah's motion. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered. But the question wasn't for him. She tried again. He blocked her again. The house felt too small then, too warm, too filled with the tight, breathless panic that comes from being stretched past one's limits. Sarah's heart pounded as she held Ava close, her hand pressed to the baby's back, feeling the unsteady rhythm of a child who hadn't slept well in days. Ranger's eyes followed every motion, dark, alert, pleading. By midnight, Sarah's mind was a fog. She placed Ava back in her crib and stepped out into the hallway, her body shaking with exhaustion. When she turned, she saw Ranger settle in front of the nursery door. Slowly, deliberately, as if planting himself there. His tail lay still against the floor. His breathing deepened. He did not sleep, and Sarah, in her weary confusion, felt a spark of fear. "Move," she whispered. Ranger didn't. She pushed him with her foot, gently at first, then harder. He only lowered his head as though accepting something heavy he could not explain. Tears filled her eyes. Not anger exactly, but the ache that comes when love and fear collide. "I can't do this tonight," she said through shaking breaths. "I can't." Her voice cracked on the last word. It was past 3 a.m. when she found him still lying there, a silent sentry before the nursery, his body motionless, his gaze fixed. Sarah crouched beside him, her knees buckling beneath the weight of the day. She wanted to understand him. She wanted to trust him, but exhaustion clouded every truth. When Ava whimpered again, Ranger's ears twitched, and he pushed himself upright, as if ready to face something only he could sense. That was when Sarah broke. Her tears fell onto the wooden floor, tiny dark circles spreading outward. She covered her face with both hands, whispering, Why won't you just stop?" Her voice crumpled. Ranger bowed his head, inching closer, but not touching her, respecting the fragile space between grief and misunderstanding. And then, quieter than a breath, she said the words that made Ranger's chest rise and fall in one long, aching sigh. "Tomorrow, you're staying outside." Ranger didn't move. He only lowered himself back onto the floor, curling his body before the nursery door. A dog who once knew abandonment, now accepting a punishment he didn't understand, because his duty, whatever it was, kept him there. When Sarah walked away, the house fell still again. Rain softened against the glass. Ava slept in small, restless breaths, and Ranger, alone in the hallway, kept his silent vigil, carrying a truth no one yet saw, and a loyalty deeper than the fear surrounding it. The morning light was thin, pale as breath on cold glass. Sarah stood in the hallway for a long moment before opening the nursery door, one hand on the frame to steady herself. Her sweater hung loose on her tired body, and her hair, still gathered in its fading bun, felt heavier than it should have. The house was quiet, too quiet after a night like that. Ava's restless crying, the storm in Sarah's own mind, Ranger's silent vigil on the floor. When she finally pushed the door open, the hinges let out a soft groan, like an old man waking. And then everything happened at once. Ranger lunged forward, not to attack, but to shield. His paws landed beside Ava's cradle, his chest lowered protectively, his black and tan coat bristling. A deep, urgent bark tore through the still air. He gripped the edge of the blanket and pulled, dragging the cradle away from the wall with a force he had never used in this house. Sarah's breath snapped inside her. She cried out, rushing forward, convinced the fear she'd carried through the night had finally become real. For one flashing second, she saw it all wrong. The dog she once saved, now turning on the child she loved more than anything. "Ranger, no, please," she choked. But Ranger didn't look at her. His eyes, dark, unwavering, were locked on the wall behind the crib. Not on Ava, not even on her. On the wall. A faint smell reached her then. Barely there. A thin, sour scent, like burnt dust. It slipped beneath the door of memory, back to an old apartment she once lived in, where a faulty heater filled the air with that same uneasy odor. A warning wrapped inside something small. She stepped closer. Her hand hovered above the paint, her fingers trembling before they touched the surface. The wall was warm, too warm. Something tightened in her chest. She knelt, eyes searching, vision still blurry from exhaustion. And there, just behind the crib, she saw it. The white outlet cover had dimmed to a faint brown, a fragile halo of heat curling around its edges. A single thread-like ribbon of smoke rose from a crack near the top, delicate enough to miss from afar, deadly enough to matter. Her breath left her in one long, breaking exhale. Oh my God! She pressed her hand to her mouth. Ranger stood close beside her now, his body tense but quiet, his gaze softening as if he finally, blessedly, could share the truth he had carried alone. All the pieces rushed back at once, the growls, the blocking doorway, the restless pacing, the nights he refused to leave Ava's side, the way he dragged the cradle across the floor as though fighting some invisible threat. It had never been aggression. It had been desperation, a dog trying to speak in a language people often forget to listen to. Sarah sank to the floor beside him, her knees folding beneath her. She let her hand rest on his neck, tentative, trembling, and Ranger leaned into her touch with a slow, weary acceptance. His fur was warm beneath her, fingers warmer than she remembered, maybe because she had kept her distance for too long. Ava stirred in the cradle, a soft cry beginning in her throat, but Ranger only cast a gentle glance toward her as if assuring her it was over. Sarah felt a sting of tears gather in her eyes. She remembered the rain-soaked gas station where she found him years ago, the thin creature he once was, the shame in his lowered head when she lifted him into the car. She had saved him then. She thought that was the end of the story. But life, she realized, has a quiet way of letting debts be repaid, sometimes in the moments we fear the most. The house creaked as morning settled deeper into its bones. Dust floated lazily through the air, catching the faint stripes of sunlight slipping through the blinds. Sarah placed both hands on the floor to steady herself, the weight of everything pressing gently against her ribs. "Ranger," she whispered, more breath than word, "I'm so sorry." The dog nudged her shoulder once, softly, as though pressing forgiveness into her skin. She lifted Ava from the cradle and held her close, stepping back toward the doorway where the air was cooler. Ranger followed, quiet and sure. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt something new settle inside her. Not clarity, not yet, but the fragile beginning of trust returning. A small promise forming in the stillness. A promise that she would listen now. She would see him anew, and she would never ignore the language of those who protect us in silence. The morning air was cold enough to sting, carrying a silence that felt almost too heavy for the hour. Sarah burst through the front door, with Ava held tight against her chest, her breath sharp and uneven. The pastel sweater she wore clung to her damp skin, and her hair fell loose around her face as though the night had finally undone her. The world outside was washed in winter light, thin, pale, and without warmth. Ranger followed close beside her, the German shepherd's paws striking the porch planks with urgent rhythm. His black and tan coat bristled, every line of his body pulled toward the house behind them, toward the danger he had sensed long before she had listened. Sarah's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped her phone. The screen blurred as she fumbled to dial. When she finally reached the operator, her voice cracked, not from panic alone, but from the shattering realization of what she had almost lost. Ava whimpered against her chest, her small fingers curling lightly into the sweater. The dispatcher's calm, practiced voice guided her through each breath. "Step outside. Stay clear of the house. Help is on the way." Sarah stepped backward into the yard, her bare feet pressing into frost-bitten grass. Behind her, Ranger kept pivoting toward the nursery window, as if expecting the wall to break open at any moment. His ears pricked forward. His breaths came slow, heavy, like a soldier waiting for an explosion he had already survived once. The house, once a place of warmth, now lurked like something unfamiliar, its walls holding secrets, its quiet betraying a danger that had grown in the dark behind paint and wires. Sarah pressed her lips to Ava's forehead. The baby's skin felt too warm, too fragile, every breath precious in ways Sarah had never fully understood until now. The fire trucks arrived with a roar that shattered the morning stillness. Red lights spilled across the neighborhood, flashing over quiet lawns and sleeping windows. Captain Jeffrey Holt stepped out first, a man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a lined face and graying stubble that suggested years of long nights and harder truths. His fire-resistant jacket bore soot marks from battles he never spoke about, and his voice, low and firm, carried the weight of someone who had seen too many homes fall apart in minutes. "Where's the source?" he asked. Sarah lifted a shaking hand toward the nursery window. Behind the crib. Inside the wall. Holt nodded once, then signaled his crew. The firefighters moved with practiced grace, shouldering axes, unrolling hoses, entering the house as though stepping into the jaws of something familiar. Their boots echoed through the hallway, each step a reminder of how close danger had crept. Sarah held Ava tighter. Ranger stood beside her, his body brushing against her leg in small, grounding touches. Each time he glanced up at her, there was an unspoken plea, not for forgiveness, but for her, to understand the truth he had tried so hard to show her. After what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed, Holt emerged from the house. His helmet hung loosely in one hand, his breath visible in the cold air. His eyes carried that quiet gravity, the kind only a man who has delivered too much bad news can hold without breaking. "You're lucky," he said, voice low. "Another 10 minutes." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And there wouldn't have been time. Sarah's knees gave out before she knew she was falling. Holt caught her by the elbow, steadying her without judgment. She clutched Ava close, her breaths coming in small, panicked bursts. The truth pierced her like cold rain. Her daughter had been lying inches from the heart of a fire that would have swallowed the room whole. Ranger stepped forward then, pushing his head beneath her free hand. His body was warm, alive, steady. Sarah let her palm rest on him, her fingers sinking into his fur. Something inside her, tight, knotted, bruised, finally loosened. She looked into his eyes, not wild, not dangerous, just loyal, just tired, just waiting for her to see him again. A sob broke from her chest, soft and cracking. She wrapped an arm around Ranger's neck, pulling him close. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved us." Ranger leaned into the embrace with a quiet exhale, the kind that carries both relief and forgiveness. The fire crew continued their work, but the world around Sarah dimmed to a gentle blur. In that yard, under a gray morning sky, she felt something shift, like a door opening inside her, letting light back in. Her fear had not vanished, but something stronger had begun to take its place. A promise, a vow to trust the silent signals she once ignored, a vow to honor the loyalty that had nearly cost them everything. She held Ava, rested her hand on Ranger's back, and let the cold morning settle into stillness around them. Evening light drifted through the windows, warm and golden, settling gently on everything it touched. Weeks had passed since the fire, yet its echo still lingered in the quiet corners of the house. Sarah moved slowly through the newly repaired nursery, her hand brushing the smooth surface of the freshly painted wall. The scent of new wood mingled with faint lavender, an aroma she chose to soothe Ava's sleep. And there, beside the crib, lay a small new bed, soft, clean, its edges rounded like the cradle of something cherished. Ranger rested there now, his 6-year-old frame curled loosely on the cushion. His black and tan coat shimmered beneath the golden light. He lifted his head when Sarah approached, ears tilting in that gentle, familiar way. Sarah knelt beside him. For a moment she didn't speak. She simply let her hand rest against his fur, warm beneath her palm. Not long ago she had doubted him, feared him even. Now she felt a quiet shame soften into gratitude. Ranger exhaled a slow breath, his eyes half closing as if recognizing the shift inside her. Ava stirred in the crib. She made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a laugh. Sarah leaned over, brushing her daughter's cheek with a fingertip. The baby blinked once, then turned her gaze toward Ranger's bed. And then it came, the small, radiant smile she now reserved only for him. Sarah felt her throat tighten. There was something sacred in that smile, something wordless and deep, as though Ava carried a memory of being held by Ranger, of warmth, of safety, of a heartbeat pressed close to hers in a moment when the world had nearly disappeared. There are bonds, Sarah realized, that form before language has time to claim them. The front door opened later that afternoon. Michael stepped inside, wind-tired and road-worn from days away. He carried the look of a man who had rushed home the moment he heard the truth. His bomber jacket hung open, revealing a gray T-shirt and the faint smell of diesel and cold air. His face, lined at the edges from weeks of work, softened when he saw Sarah holding Ava by the fireplace. "Are you both all right?" he asked, voice low, roughened by sleepless miles. Sarah nodded, but her eyes glistened. "Because of him." She tilted her head toward Ranger. The German shepherd stood quietly, tail low, eyes steady on the man he also considered family. Michael set his bags down slowly, the weight of realization settling into his shoulders. He walked toward Ranger with cautious steps, as if approaching someone who carried truths too heavy for words. Then he knelt. One hand reached out, trembling slightly, and he wrapped his arms around Ranger's neck. The dog leaned in, pressing his head against Michael's chest. "Good boy," Michael whispered, voice cracking with something that wasn't sadness, but gratefulness so profound it nearly broke him. Good boy. Thank you." Ranger stayed still, accepting the embrace with the calm of someone who had done what needed to be done. No pride, no expectation, just the quiet dignity of a guardian who asked for nothing but to be heard. Sarah watched them, her heart full. The moment stretched gently, like old film slowing to catch every frame of a memory too precious to lose. In the days that followed, neighbors drifted by with cautious curiosity. Mrs. Evelyn Park, 60, kind-eyed, wrapped in her knitted cardigan, was the first to knock. She listened, hand over her chest, as Sarah recounted the story. Others followed, and soon the tale passed through the neighborhood like a warm whisper. The abandoned dog who became a family's savior. The shepherd who warned them of fire when no one else could see it. The silent sentinel who lay at a baby's door night after night, waiting for someone to understand. Ranger never seemed to notice the attention. He kept close to Ava, lying beside her crib each night, rising at her smallest cry, watching her with an affection so gentle it softened everything around him. And Sarah, once fearful, once uncertain, now felt a steadiness return to her life. A quiet faith, a renewed trust. One evening, as she rocked Ava to sleep, Ranger settled at her feet. Sarah looked down at him. "I won't forget again," she said softly. Ranger blinked, slow and peaceful, as though blessing the promise. Ava let out a sleepy sound, her small hand lifting toward the dog in the half-light. Ranger leaned closer, accepting the unspoken bond between them. And the house, after so many nights of fear, felt whole once more. Sometimes, in our quiet rooms and aching days, we forget that love can still find us, through people, through memories, even through a loyal guardian like Ranger. For anyone facing loneliness, illness, or the weight of age, may this story remind you that your life still matters deeply. Share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe so we can walk these gentle stories together. May God bless you, protect your health, and bring peace to your heart today.